G'day, my name's Nurchin, and today we're having a look at the magical entities that are wizards. Throughout history and across cultures, we have a whole bunch of names for different conjurers of magic. Magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, Kanye, but they all kind of mean the same thing with a slight difference in location, practice, or gender. The word wizard is from Europe in the Middle Ages, deriving from the old word for wise. Back then there was no discernible difference between science and magic, so these were simply learned men that people would come to for counsel or remedies. A lot of the mysterious ways of wizards, in hindsight, appear to just be scientific experimentation. But what about the pointed hats and the long beards and flowing robes? How do we get this depiction of a wizard that appears to have remained unchanged for centuries? Well, it's because this depiction of wizards was inspired by real people, real practices, and of course a touch of fiction. To discover the history of wizards, we need to not only go back in time, but deep into the forests of Europe. This is where we can find possibly the earliest origin of the modern wizard, the shaman. And before I get 1,000 comments about shaman or shaman.
Shaman. Shaman.
Shaman.
Shamanism originated in the ancient cultures of North Asia. While technically not European back then, over time these practices, or at least reports of these practices, made their way south into Russia and other European countries. A shaman is a religious leader capable of communicating with the transcendent world. This gives them certain abilities like healing, communicating with spirits, and other ritual powers like divination. Already we can see parallels and inspirations to the modern wizard. A lot of wizard folklore tells of them living out alone in the forest, shrouded in mystery, which in this case perfectly describes the shaman. This communication with spirits was important as well, because like in animism, that means communication with all creatures, including animals. This may have inspired the idea behind the wizard familiar many years later. I think my familiar is probably the drop bear. Oh, there you are. Anyway, it wasn't only animals that were seen in depictions of wizards. Archaeologists have found burial sites of powerful shamans that include another iconic tool of wizards, the wand. Some of these shamanic wands were made of ivory and were dated back thousands of years before they were an iconic symbol of the occult. When practicing magic, a wand can be used to direct your intent, like an extension of your will. The image of our modern wizard grows clearer, but that still doesn't look like a wizard. To answer that, we'll have to go further into Europe and deeper into the forests. Here we can find Druids. Druids were a class of intellectual from Celtic culture, and while they're definitely deserving of a video of their own, they're an important step in the history of wizardry. They were authority figures in religion, medicine, and even politics. They didn't share their knowledge with the outside world, which made them appear even more mysterious. And just like the shamans, we can see more inspiration to the modern wizard, with a focus on philosophy and more modern medicine like herbology. Their knowledge was never documented and was only ever shared by word of mouth. It's believed to remember formulae. They may have recited the steps and ingredients as they worked, which may have inspired ideas about modern magic chanting or even spellcasting. And it wasn't just the practices that were more wizardly, they started to look like it too. The Druids of the time would have worn cloaks and robes made of fabric, leather, and hide, and some of them even wore pointed hats. A mummified corpse was found from the 4th century BC known as Tollund Man. He was thought to have been sacrificed in a druidic ritual and perfectly preserved in a bog. As well as wearing a cloak made of hide, he was also wearing a pointed helmet made of birch bark, a style of hat that may have inspired modern wizard attire. But the age of Druids did not last forever. Christianity swept through, becoming the religious authority. The church was frightened of the Druids' knowledge, so they spread rumors about their barbaric practices. Well, I mean, some of it was kind of barbaric, but anyway. Their teachings lived on in small village doctors and wandering scholars, but they were now steeped further in superstition and myth. Myth that led to the archetypal wizard, the OG, Merlin. Originally created by Geoffrey Monmouth in the 11th century, Marlinus Ambrosius is a fictional character from Arthurian legend. Born of a human mother and an incubus father, he went mad after experiencing the horrors of war and escaped into the wilderness. It's through this transformation that he developed his powers, learning how to communicate with animals, gaining prophetic abilities, and ultimately returning back to civilization as a respected wizard. I'm paraphrasing the Christ out of that, but you get the idea. While his creation was inspired by two living people, his appearance, and that of a wizard, was inspired by magic traditions across Europe. In a way, you could consider him a shaman or a druid, living in the wilderness communicating with animals, but in these stories he was always referred to as a wizard. Merlin was instantly popular and has been included in stories by multiple authors across multiple generations, and it's in these books that we have stories and descriptions of what wizards are known to be today. It would be dismissive to imply all wizards are based off Merlin, because Merlin himself is based off other wizards before him. It just so happens that the word wizard is from European history, so it tends to get associated with other learned men of science and magic from that same history. So now we know what wizards do. They study science and magic, practice medicine and philosophy, and they give wisdom and guidance to people in need. And now we know where they came from the millennia-old shaman to the Druids of Europe. But now you want to know how to become one, how to practice magic of your very own. Well, you'll be glad to know that you're already halfway there. By watching this video, you've started learning about the history of magic, an important step in the path to wizardry. The title wizard's pretty vague and open to interpretations, so just go out and start practicing your magic, making the world a better place. Or making small objects fly around the room. It's probably pretty magic-y. And if you want to follow me on my quest through the arcane, be sure to smash that subscribe. And if you don't, I'll sick my animal familiar on you. Ow.